So my thoughts on Romain Grosjean after the Japanese Grand Prix. Well, what Grosjean did at Suzuka was totally inexcusable, and there was no need for him to have done what he did, and rightly so. Mark Webber was not a happy man after the race. Grosjean has so much potential, and we've seen so he's had so many highs this year. We saw Romain finish on the podium in Bahrain, and we've seen him put in so many strong performances. But on the other side of the coin, we've also seen Romain cause unnecessary collisions. We saw what happened at Belgium at turn 1, and we also saw what Romain did at Suzuka. There's no need for him to do what he did, and Romain needs to learn quickly, because if he carries on causing collisions, then there are going to be a lot of unhappy drivers in the paddock, and Grosjean just needs to calm down, needs to think about what he's doing, and just needs to sort himself out. I know Sir Jackie Stewart has offered to help Grosjean and give him advice on how to prevent these collisions, and I think Grosjean would benefit from talking to Sir Jackie Stewart. So Grosjean needs to sort himself out. He needs to stop causing these unnecessary collisions, and rightly so. Mark Webber was not a happy man after the Japanese Grand Prix. I totally agree with you, Jack. The battle between Kimi Raikkonen and Lewis Hamilton at Suzuka was a great example of the incredible driving skill that both drivers have. We saw Kimi give enough space for Lewis to make the move on him at turn 1, and we also saw Kimi having to turn his steering wheel to the left so that he could avoid going into Lewis Hamilton, and had there been a collision, that could have ended really horribly. But no, both drivers did really well to make sure there wasn't a collision, particularly Kimi, and it was great to see the respect shown by both drivers. And with two world champions, you'd expect them to show respect on the track, and in that instance they certainly did. So fair play to both Lewis and Kimi. I thought they did well in that instance, and Kimi should be given a lot of credit for what he did, because he could so easily have caused a collision, but he didn't. And yeah, so fair play Kimi and Lewis. So will Felipe Massa be staying at Ferrari for next season? Well, after his performance at Suzuka, I think Felipe has every right to be confident about his future at Ferrari, and I think he will be a Ferrari driver next season. We know that Felipe hasn't been the same driver since what happened at Hungary in 2009 in qualifying, and that seems to have had a big effect on Massa, and of course it would have a big effect on any driver. But Felipe, it's been a struggle for him since his return, and he's been playing second fiddle to Alonso, and that's not been obvious to see. But I'm hoping now that this result at Suzuka will give Felipe Massa plenty of confidence, and he can go on to have a strong end to the 2012 season, because we know that Felipe Massa's got the talent. We know that Massa is a race winner, and he's proved that on several occasions. So yeah, I think Felipe Massa will stay at Ferrari, and I hope he can give Fernando Alonso, his teammate, a run for his money for the remainder of the season. So do Williams have the potential to overtake Force India for 7th place in the Constructors? I think Williams do have the potential, but I don't think they will overtake Force India for 7th place in the Constructors. I think Force India have got more than enough to fend off the challenge from Williams. Pastor Maldonado, although he won in Spain, since then he only scored points at Japan, where he finished 8th, so he hasn't exactly been in the points on a regular basis. And Bruno Senna, his qualifying hasn't been great throughout 2012, and although he's made up for it in the race, I just think that his qualifying has let him down, and I just think that Valtteri Bottas could be in contention to replace Bruno Senna for the 2013 season. So I could certainly see Bottas and Maldonado being the Williams lineup for 2013. So I think Williams do have the potential to overtake Force India in the Constructors, but I just don't think they will. I think Force India will finish 7th, and just talking of Force India, they're 30 odd points behind Sauber in the Constructors, and mathematically it's still possible for Force India to overtake Sauber, but it's going to be difficult. But having said that, it only takes one strong result for Force India and one poor result for Sauber, and Force India are right back in contention for sixth place in the Constructors. And Force India are not exactly far away from the podium, and they're going to tracks that should suit their car. So don't think Force India are out of the battle for sixth place, because I still think one strong result and Force India could be able to challenge Sauber for sixth place in the Constructors. So potentially, I think Force India will finish 7th in the Constructors, and I think it's can be difficult for them to overtake Sauber, but I can certainly see Force India finishing ahead of Williams in the Constructors. I personally think Kamui Kobayashi has done a great job at Sauber, and he's certainly done a decent job. I've been impressed with him, and based on what I saw at Suzuka, I think he does deserve to stay at the Swiss-based team. And although he hasn't exactly been in the headlines as much as his teammate Sergio Perez, who's been on the podium 3 times this year, Kamui has still put in some strong performances this year. I remember he put in a strong showing in Australia, he finished 4th in Germany, and he finished 3rd at Japan. And what a place to be on the podium for your first time in your Formula 1 career, and to do it in front of your home crowd. That must have been something really special for Kamui. So fair play to Kobayashi, and I personally think he deserves to stay at Sauber for at least another season, and I think it would be wrong for Sauber to get rid of Kobayashi. Well, you're certainly putting me on the spot here, aren't you, Michael? I personally think that the world champion will be from the top 4 drivers in the either one of the top 4 drivers in the drivers' standings. Firstly, Fernando Alonso. I think that although he retired from the Grand Prix at Japan, he's always been consistent and he's always been able to get the best out of the Ferrari. And if he can be on the podium at least 3 or 4 times in the last 5 races, and if he can win at least one of them, I think Fernando could be a serious contender to be crowned world champion in 2012. Secondly, Sebastian Vettel. We know that Red Bull are going to tracks that will suit their car. We know that Red Bull like Korea. Sebastian won in India last year. So Sebastian, if he can win a couple of races, I think he'll be in real contention to be crowned world champion this year. And if he does get crowned world champion in 2012, it'll be for a consecutive year he's been crowned world champion. But yeah, I think Sebastian will be in real contention to be crowned world champion. Kimi Raikkonen, although Lotus haven't won a race in 2012, he finds himself not far behind Vettel and Alonso, and Kimi, like Fernando, has been consistent throughout 2012, and I've been really impressed with the way Kimi has performed on his return to Formula 1. I wasn't expecting him to perform anywhere near as good as he's been performing this year. But Kimi's done a great job for Lotus, and if Lotus are capable of winning a race this year, and if Kimi does win a race in 2012, I could see him being a real contender for the Drivers' Championships. So don't count out Kimi, and also don't count out Lewis Hamilton either. It only takes a couple of race victories for Lewis, and he's right back in the fight for the Drivers' Championship. And McLaren for sure will fancy their chance of winning a couple of races from now till the end of the season. And if Lewis can win, I'd say 2 races out of the last 5, I think Lewis will have a great chance of being crowned world champion. But I personally, if I had to make a decision as to who will be crowned world champion, it would for me have to be Fernando Alonso. I still think he's in a good position, although his Drivers' Championship lead has been cut to 4 points now. I still think Fernando is in a strong position. I still think that if he finishes on the podium at least 3 or 4 times in the last 5 races, I think Alonso will be a real contender and will have a strong chance of being crowned world champion this year. So for me, I'm going to go for Fernando Alonso to be crowned world champion in 2012. Don't forget, you can keep your questions coming in for Ask Manish. Send them to @baggies20, and I look forward to reading them. But for now, cheerio.